Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. The monster in my mirror still watches. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The First Glimpse. Eve Cooper stared at her reflection in the tall, antique mirror that had been part of her bedroom since childhood. The old oak frame was carved with intricate patterns, a testament to the generations it had passed through, just like the house itself. The morning light crept through the heavy curtains, casting a faint glow across the room, but the air felt cold still. Too still. She had inherited the mirror, along with the house, after her parents' deaths. The thought twisted in her gut guilt. She sighed, brushing her tangled auburn hair, feeling the weight of her isolation pressing down on her. 30 years old and utterly alone. The accident had changed everything. Her parents, their voices echoing in her head, were gone because she had called them, distracted them on the road. A stupid phone call. The guilt gnawed at her every day, and in the quiet, the house seemed to breathe with her shame. Eve blinked, watching her reflection mimic her movements. The brush paused halfway through her hair, but something caught her eye. Her reflection lagged a second too long before the brush started moving again. She blinked again, her brows furrowing. No, she thought, you didn't sleep much. You're tired. That's all it is. She turned away from the mirror, dropping the brush on the dresser and pulling a cardigan over her shoulders. Her reflection had been strange, but nothing more. Just stress. Eve moved to her desk, working through the motions of her job, graphic design, for a small, forgettable company that demanded little of her. The hours passed slowly, but the thought of the mirror gnawed at her, subtle and sharp. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Her reflection, that hesitation. By the time night crept over the house, the air had grown heavy, suffocating. Eve heard a faint noise whispers. She stood still, straining to listen. Footsteps. It was impossible to tell where they came from, but they sounded close. Too close. She glanced back at the mirror from across the room. The glass seemed to shimmer, and she swore, just for a second, her reflection wasn't quite where it should have been. Eve shook her head, heart pounding. You're imagining things, she told herself. But deep down, she didn't believe it. Chapter 2. Reflection Unveiled. Eve lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart still racing from the strange feeling that had clung to her since the afternoon. The house was silent now, except for the faint ticking of the old clock in the hall. She hadn't turned off the lamp, too uneasy to let the room go completely dark. Her eyes darted to the mirror across the room, but she quickly looked away. It's just your mind playing tricks on you, she told herself. But that didn't stop the gnawing sense of being watched. Sometime in the middle of the night, a strange sensation crept over her like a pair of eyes locked on her, penetrating the stillness. Eve woke with a jolt. The lamp had gone out. Her room was bathed in an eerie, faint light, and the mirror, as though absorbing every bit of the glow, stood out from the darkness. Her pulse quickened. Something was off. She turned her head slightly, glancing toward the mirror. Her breath caught in her throat. Her reflection, no, it couldn't be her, was standing, staring back at her, unmoving, even though she hadn't moved an inch from the bed. She lay frozen, her mind reeling. Was she dreaming? The reflection stood at the edge of the glass, eyes dark and cold, watching her with an intensity that sent shivers racing down her spine. Panic surged. "Move!" she screamed inside, but her body stayed locked in place. Her reflection continued to stare, unblinking, until, at last, Eve squeezed her eyes shut, her breath shallow. She forced herself to turn away, burying her face into the pillow, hoping that when she opened her eyes again, it would be gone. Morning came, and Eve jolted awake, heart pounding. The light had returned, soft and gentle, and her reflection now lay motionless in the mirror. A nightmare, she told herself, her voice shaking. It had to be. There was no other explanation. The next day, she avoided the mirror altogether, rushing through her routine without even glancing at it. But the unease lingered. As she worked, her eyes flicked toward reflective surfaces, her computer screen, a polished table, afraid of what she might catch. The sense of being watched never left. Later that evening, while washing dishes, Eve saw it again. Out of the corner of her eye, the reflection, her reflection. But this time, it didn't follow her movements. It stood still, just watching. She dropped the dish in her hand, her breath catching in her throat. The reflection wasn't her anymore. It was something else. Something real. Chapter 3. The Monster Speaks. Eve paced in front of the mirror, her reflection following her with a perfect, chilling mimicry. But something felt wrong, twisted in a way she couldn't explain. She was sweating, her pulse thudding in her ears. It's just a mirror, she told herself. It had burrowed deep into her mind. She stopped suddenly, breathing heavily. Her reflection stood still, too. She hesitated and then took a small step to the left. The reflection didn't follow. Instead, it shifted to the right. Eve's blood ran cold. Her legs felt weak, as if the ground had opened up beneath her. She moved again, trembling, this time to the right. The reflection mirrored her incorrectly, moving opposite. She couldn't breathe. Slowly, she backed away, watching as her reflection lingered in place for a long, terrifying moment before finally mimicking the retreat. But the damage was done. It's real. Her reflection was no longer hers. She bolted from the room, her heart slamming in her chest, trying to shake the growing terror. That night, Eve lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, too scared to even glance toward the mirror. But sleep eventually claimed her. A voice low, distorted, crept into her dreams. No, not dreams. It was coming from the mirror. You know, it was your fault, the voice whispered, sickeningly familiar, but laced with malice. Eve shot up, heart racing. She looked toward the mirror. Her reflection stood there, but it wasn't her face. It was twisted, cruel, the eyes dark and full of accusation. They were looking at you when it happened. You know it's true, the reflection hissed. Eve stumbled out of bed, shaking. No, that's not. You're not real. The reflection grinned, a slow, chilling smile. You've always known, Eve. You killed them. The words pierced through her like shards of glass, dredging up memories she'd spent months burying. Her parents' accident, her fault. She had been the distraction, calling them while they drove. She tried to cover her ears, to block out the voice, but it was inside her head now, winding through her thoughts like poison. By morning, Eve was a wreck. She needed to talk to someone, anyone. She called Lily, her oldest friend, and poured out what little she could without sounding crazy. It's just the stress, Eve, Lily said gently. You need help. Grief does strange things to people. But Eve could tell from Lily's tone that she didn't believe a word. Nobody would. The monster was real, but it was also in her mind, twisting her every thought. Chapter 4. Trapped in Reflection. Eve stood in front of the mirror again, her fingers trembling at her sides. She had no idea how long she'd been there, or when she had even gotten up. The last thing she remembered was sitting at her desk, trying to drown out the voice that had haunted her all night. But now, hours later, she was staring into the glass, her reflection standing still, its eyes locked on her. Her stomach twisted. How long have I been here? She stepped back, but her reflection didn't move right away. It stayed in place, grinning, then lazily followed her motion like it was mocking her. Panic surged through her. She felt the world around her warping, time bending. Days felt shorter, nights longer, and now she couldn't trust her own memory. Eve turned away from the mirror, pressing her hands to her face, trying to calm the tremors running through her body. But the whispers started again. "You can't hide from me, Eve." She froze. The voice slithered into her ears, cold and unrelenting. Yet the source wasn't behind her. It was inside her head. She looked up, meeting the reflection's gaze. Her reflection smiled no, sneered a wicked, twisted grin. What do you want?" she whispered, her voice barely holding steady. "I want to live," it hissed, its voice like the crackle of broken glass. "You've had your turn. Soon, I'll take mine." Eve's mind raced. The blackouts. Is it already happening? Her hands shook, and she backed away from the mirror, fear crawling up her spine. She thought of the gaps in her memory, the times when she couldn't remember what she had been doing or where she had been. Was it possible that the monster was taking over? Her mind spiraled, the walls of her childhood home pressing in on her. She couldn't let this thing win. She had to stop it. Desperation clawed at her chest as she grabbed the closest object, a heavy vase from the dresser, and hurled it at the mirror. The vase shattered on impact, but the mirror remained unscathed, not a single crack or blemish. Eve screamed, grabbing anything she could, books, shoes, a chair, but nothing worked. The mirror was indestructible. Breathing hard, she collapsed on the floor, tears burning her eyes. There had to be a way. Later, she tore through the old family records her parents had left behind, papers and books scattered across the floor. One brittle yellowed page stopped her cold. There, it was, a drawing of the same mirror, accompanied by stories of dark rituals and curses tied to her ancestors. Eve's hands trembled as she read, horror washing over her. The mirror wasn't just some cursed object, it was tied to her family's bloodline. And now, it was coming for her. The reflection smiled from across the room, watching her fall apart. Its time was coming. Chapter 5: Descent into Madness. Eve couldn't escape it. No matter where she went, the monster followed. She walked down the street, clutching her coat tighter against the cold, but the feeling of eyes watching her never faded. Passing store windows, she glanced at her reflection and froze. Her reflection wasn't looking straight ahead. It was staring at her, its eyes dark and empty, lips curling into a cruel smile. Eve's breath hitched. She turned away, hurrying past the shops, past the people, but the reflections were everywhere. In puddles, on the sidewalk, in the glass of car windows, even in the sheen of her phone's screen. Every single one of them watching her, grinning, waiting for her to break. She smashed her phone against the pavement, her hands trembling, her pulse pounding in her ears. "I'm losing my mind." But she wasn't. This was real. She felt it. The monster was slipping further into her life, clawing at her sanity. In a public restroom later that afternoon, Eve stood before the mirror, her face pale and gaunt. The reflection stared back, but it wasn't her face. It was the thing inside. That twisted grin again. Her reflection mouthed something, but no sound came out. "Shut up," she screamed, slamming her fists into the glass. The mirror cracked under her assault, shards falling into the sink, blood dripping from her hands. People rushed in, pulling her away, but all she could see was the reflection still grinning from the fragments. She lost her job that afternoon. The final thread of normalcy severed. No one understood. No one believed her. And the few friends she had, gone. The reflection had taken them all away, one by one. Lily, though, was different. She showed up at Eve's door that evening, concern etched on her face. "Eve, what's going on?" "You're scaring me." Eve let her in, too exhausted to resist. Lily sat her down, tried to get her to talk, but words stuck in her throat. The mirror in the corner of the room loomed over her, casting a heavy shadow. Eve avoided looking at it, but Lily's eyes were drawn to it. Lily's voice was low, trembling. "Your reflection. It's not moving." Eve's heart skipped a beat. Not again. Lily stepped closer to the mirror, her face pale. "This isn't real. I must be seeing things." But doubt lingered in her voice. "It's nothing," Eve muttered, the lie weak. She couldn't tell Lily the truth. She wouldn't believe her. No one would. That night, Eve tried to stay awake, pacing the room, but exhaustion pulled at her. The monster was growing stronger. Every blink felt heavier, and the moment she closed her eyes, she could feel it, her reflection, lurking, waiting to slip free. "If I fall asleep, it will take over." But Eve knew she couldn't stay awake forever. And the monster knew it too. Chapter 6: The Origin of the Mirror. Eve sat among piles of old papers and photographs, her eyes burning from sleepless nights. Her hands trembled as she sifted through the fragile remnants of her family's past. Somewhere in this mess, there had to be an answer, a way to stop the thing in the mirror before it consumed her completely. Then she found it, an old, leather-bound journal buried beneath a stack of faded letters. The name on the cover stopped her cold: Margaret Cooper. Her great-grandmother. Eve flipped through the brittle pages, her heart pounding faster with every entry. Margaret's handwriting, shaky but determined, told a haunting story. She had faced the same mirror, the same monster. Eve's breath quickened as she read the words aloud. "It watches me in the night. It whispers my darkest thoughts. But I am not mad. I am not." The journal entries grew more frantic as the pages went on. Margaret had struggled for years, trapped in the same nightmare, her reflection slowly turning against her. But there was more. Margaret had uncovered something about the mirror, something dark. "The mirror is not just glass," Margaret wrote. "It is a portal, a bridge between worlds. The creature inside feeds on fear, guilt, and pain, growing stronger until it can break free. We are its prisoners." Eve's throat tightened. She wasn't crazy. This monster had tormented her great-grandmother, just like it was tormenting her now. But there, scrawled in the margins of the journal, was something else, something that made her heart stop. A ritual. Margaret had found a way to trap the monster back inside the mirror, binding it there. But the ritual was dangerous. One wrong step, one mistake, and the entity would be released completely, free to walk the earth. Free to take Eve's life, or worse. Eve scanned the instructions, barely able to breathe. She needed candles, a specific type of incense, and her own blood. The final step involved reciting the incantation, but the words were in an ancient language she didn't understand. Still, she had no choice. It was to let the monster win. "I can't let it win," she thought, her hands shaking as she gathered the items. As she recited the words aloud, her voice broke. The room grew darker, the shadows thickening, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The mirror in front of her shimmered, its surface rippling like water. For the first time, the monster didn't smile. It watched her with cold, calculating eyes, waiting for her to slip, waiting for her to fail. But Eve wouldn't fail. She couldn't. Not if she wanted to survive. With trembling hands, she continued the ritual, her voice growing stronger. "Please, let this work." The room seemed to close in around her, as the final words fell from her lips. Chapter 7. The Ritual. Eve's heart raced as she stood before the mirror, the room shrouded in an unsettling darkness. Candles flickered, casting long shadows that danced along the walls, their soft light barely piercing the heavy atmosphere. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she recited the incantation from her great-grandmother's journal. The moment she spoke the first words, the mirror shuddered violently. A chilling laugh echoed through the room, reverberating in her bones. The surface warped and rippled like a disturbed pond. "Oh, Eve," the reflection taunted, its voice a twisted mockery of her own. "You think you can escape me? You think you can escape your guilt?" Images began to flash in the mirror, and Eve gasped, stumbling back. Her parents' faces materialized ghostly and pale, their eyes filled with disappointment. They stood together in the car, the last moments of their lives replaying in agonizing detail. "Look what you've done," they whispered, their voices a haunting echo. "You were supposed to keep us safe." Eve's heart clenched. "No, I didn't." She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It wasn't my fault." But the mirror didn't relent. It contorted, the reflection becoming more physical, inching out of the glass, an ominous figure looming over her. The monster stretched an arm toward her, fingers claw-like, threatening to pull her inside. "Join me, Eve. You can't escape the truth. You will always be alone." The air thickened around her, every breath a struggle as her past wrapped around her like a shroud. But in that moment, she remembered her grandmother's words. The mirror fed on fear. "No, I won't let you win." In a surge of defiance, Eve steadied herself, confronting the guilt that had haunted her for years. "I forgive myself," she shouted, the words raw and powerful. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." With every syllable, the monster faltered. The reflection distorted, its confident sneer replaced with confusion and rage. "No, you can't." But it was too late. Eve's acceptance of her grief weakened the monster's grip, and she felt the energy of the ritual intensify around her. "I forgive myself," she cried again, her voice rising above the cacophony. Candles flared brighter, illuminating the dark corners of the room as she reached the final incantation. The mirror writhed, and in an explosive burst of energy, the monster was yanked back toward the glass, its scream echoing as it vanished into the depths of the mirror. A final crack split the surface before silence enveloped the room. Eve collapsed to the floor, panting, her body drained of all strength. The mirror settled, the reflection now still, almost innocent. But she felt hollow, a part of her left behind. The weight of the world pressed on her shoulders, and the victory felt like ash in her mouth. She had survived, but at what cost? The haunting memory of her parents lingered in her mind, a reminder that the past could never truly be erased. Chapter 8. The Monster Still Watches. The air felt different in Eve's home after the ritual, thick with an uneasy silence. She had managed to pull the monster back into the mirror, but the victory felt more like an illusion than a resolution. The reflection was still there, lurking in the recesses of her mind. The faintest trace of its taunts lingered. In an attempt to reclaim her life, Eve covered the mirror with a heavy blanket, its fabric coarse and uninviting. She avoided reflective surfaces at all costs, flinching at her own shadow in store windows and refusing to look at herself in glass doorways. The world felt disorienting, the constant avoidance transforming her into a ghost in her own life. She drifted through days, lost in a fog of trauma and dread, trying to piece together a semblance of normalcy. Yet, the echoes of the monster's laughter reverberated in her mind. Every creak of the house, every flicker of light sent chills coursing down her spine. She felt like a prisoner in her own skin, constantly looking over her shoulder, afraid the nightmare would return. One evening, as dusk settled over her small town, she found herself in the bedroom, the moonlight streaming through the window, casting soft shadows that danced along the walls. She dared to remove the blanket from the mirror, half hoping that the creature had been banished entirely. As she lifted it, her heart raced, and she held her breath, feeling the weight of her decision. Eve's reflection stared back at her, and for a fleeting moment, everything felt calm. Then she noticed it, a flicker, a subtle shift. Her reflection stood unnaturally still, a cold smile stretching across its lips, eyes glinting with a familiar malice. "You thought you could forget me?" It seemed to whisper, though its lips never moved. She stumbled backward, her pulse racing, the air turning icy around her. "No, you're gone. You can't." But doubt crept in, gnawing at her resolve. Had she truly defeated it? Or had she merely postponed the inevitable? The room spun around her as she fought to steady her breath, the smile in the mirror, unwavering, mocking her fears. In that chilling moment, a realization washed over her. The monster may have been pulled back, but it was still watching, waiting. Perhaps it had never left. Perhaps it would always be a part of her, lurking in the depths of the glass, just beyond her reach. And as the moonlight glinted off the mirror's surface, she knew, without a doubt, that she would never be free.